Thank you today, Dr. Suen, Chloe,
Thank you.
for coming on to Kev-On Air. I know you're a firm believer of arts and culture, especially in how you use it as a platform to inspire lives. Could you share a bit how did you come to realize this calling or this mission that you have with your life?
I think it came from my parents' love for arts and culture and philanthropy. So when I was growing up, I think it wasn't like I went to art museums every day and then had that upbringing. But as I became older and as I start being more involved with family business, I spent a lot more time with my parents after I studied abroad in the US. Once I returned to Hong Kong, I started spending a lot more time with them, and I realized that they were doing a lot of philanthropic work already in Hong Kong. So they were supporting museums in China, and they were supporting a lot of efforts in sinology, so classical Chinese studies, in Hong Kong as well. So that was new to me because I didn't know. I thought my parents were great business leaders. I didn't know they had this passion to give back to the society, especially in the cultural sector. So when I returned to Hong Kong in 2009, once I started spending more time with them, and when we started going to charity events together, we started going to art auctions together, art exhibitions together, I really saw how that passion has really changed their life. So as I was witnessing that change, I also thought to myself, there must be a more systematic way of doing this. So at that point, they were making donations and supporting organizations here and there. I thought perhaps this is time to formalize this and set up a foundation to support their work and to ensure that we have a continuation of this type of philanthropic work in the future. So that's when we set up the Simon Suen Foundation in 2012, 11 years ago.
Wow, so it's 11 years
11
now.
Years, yeah.
So could you share a bit on the mission about the foundation, some of the key areas that you really see the foundation doing? And could you maybe share a bit on the history on the past 11 years and how it's transitioned to where it is now, which is a hugely successful art foundation?
Sure, thank you. So when we started, our mission was very simple, is to preserve, promote, and advance Chinese culture. And that is such a broad topic. There's so many things you can do with it. The interesting thing is that I think now we talk a lot about focusing and revitalizing Chinese culture. To be honest, 11 years ago, when I was just starting out, when we were just starting this work, it was kind of lonely. Hong Kong has a very long history of philanthropy, and a lot of resources have been put into healthcare, education. But we also thought to ourselves, culture is so important to the continuing development of a society. So on top of education, we also want to make sure that the public, students, everyone are paying attention to our roots and the valuable part of our culture. So when we started that work, not a lot of people were doing it. We set out to be very focused on academia, actually. So we supported a lot of efforts between universities and scholars in Hong Kong and China and the West. So actually, there are a lot of sinology scholars in the Western world, and we wanted to make sure that they were exchanging ideas and they were advancing Chinese culture together. That was very niche. Later on, we really saw that what we were doing was quite limited to a small group of scholars and academia. We wanted to expand it. And how we thought about it was, what is the best way for us to promote Chinese culture? What do we know best? And at that point, what we knew best was arts, because my father has been collecting Chinese modern art for quite some time. And we also saw that in Hong Kong, it seemed like at that time, not a lot of attention was being paid to Chinese art. we wanted to create a space to promote that, and through arts to promote Chinese culture. I think it was sort of, maybe it was fate. We met the former head of the museum at the University of Hong Kong, and he was retiring, and we were having a brainstorming session about what we can do in this area. Do we set up a art space? Do we set up free workshops for artists, or do we set up a venue where people can rent for exhibitions? And he proposed to us the idea of creating a privately funded museum in Hong Kong. So if we take a step back, when we go to London, New York, Tokyo, there are a lot of museums. Actually, a lot of these museums were being funded privately, not publicly sometimes, and some of them were supported by corporations. But their intention was to do goods into society and to spread an overall appreciation of art and culture. We were quite inspired by that. And when we were looking at Hong Kong, we saw that we had a lot of collectors. We have a very long history of collecting arts in Hong Kong. We also had a lot of art lovers in Hong Kong as well. But why wasn't there more privately funded museums? Why wasn't there more museums in general? So we thought maybe, we will take on this challenge and we will put some resources around it and see what we can do. It was quite a big ambition, to be honest, especially using the word museum, because when you think of a museum, you're thinking about the British Museum, the Palace Museum, and many, many objects and very grand architecture. We thought, well, we could also do it on a smaller scale. We started out in a office building, and we had about 12,000 square feet of space. And we decided to set up a museum called Sun Museum, focusing on Chinese arts, to do free exhibitions, free to people coming in to see the show, and also free for the artists being exhibited. So it wasn't a venue for rent or anything like that. We wanted to do that to fill a gap in the museum space at that point, where we had government museums, but we didn't have a lot of art museums. So we had one art museum, the Hong Kong Art Museum at that point. And so we thought we could bring more exhibitions to the general public. And that's how we started 8 years ago. Sun Museum was founded in 2015 in May. So we just celebrated our 8th birthday.
Congrats.
We have done 50 shows. We just opened our 51st exhibition. So for a small organization with 6 people, I think we have taken on quite an ambition and delivered quite a variety of shows to the public.
Right. Well, you're far too humble, because as the founder of Sun Museum and the chair of Simon Suen Foundation, you're so established and so successful.
Thank you.
I guess a bit more, a bit of a personal question is, coming from your family and your dad being so successful in the business arena and then also in the arts and philanthropy space, and now you're carrying on that legacy for the family. How do you carry on that legacy with Dr. Suen Chloe's element, at the same time balancing that family legacy? And do you view that as a pressure, or do you view it as a blessing?
I think we all need pressure in order to grow. So I just delivered a graduation address at my former high school in Hong Kong. And the first thing I shared with all the students was that we shouldn't focus on success. We need to focus on growth. In Chinese, the 2 terms start with the same word, sing. So instead of focusing whether or not will I fail or will I succeed in something, we need to remember that whatever happens is an experience, and we will grow and learn something out of it. So for me, this whole journey about establishing the museum and the foundation and carry on this work because of my parents' values that I share, that my siblings share. At times, it is stressful because I never study arts and I never work in a museum previously or even any art and cultural organization. But I think my mindset has always been, I believe in this and I really see value in it. So you can't really fail when you see growth as what you're trying to get out of it. And the growth is not just personal growth. I think for the museum, Mr. Yang Chuntong, who is our museum director, is extremely experienced. He has been in the museum field for 40 years. So through working with him, I have learned a tremendous amount of knowledge and built a very strong network in a field that I wasn't experiencing. But also, even for him, who worked in Hong Kong Youth for a very long time, three decades, to start a new museum, that's something new for him as well. So by witnessing how someone with so many years of experience can also grow and take a challenge after retirement is really inspiring. And I think that's the great thing about working with people across different generations. I think that's something that I really learned recently. For me, to carry on the work is very exciting because I think with my own education and my own worldview, I have background in business and I have interests across different disciplines. You can probably tell from my education background that I have many interests. And I think bringing them together from psychology to business to philosophy to arts and museums, this is really giving me a chance to, at the end of the day, I think, serve the society. The value of the work that I'm doing and my family is doing is really just out of the belief that we need to help our society. We need to give back to our society. We need to find ways to move forward and grow together as a society. So for that, I think I hope to be working on this mission for the rest of my life. And that might shift. You know, it could be arts and culture today. Maybe 20 years from now, it'll be something different. And I think that could be different for my siblings as well. It could be different for anyone based on their circumstances. But I think everyone can try to have that in the back of their head. Whatever I'm doing, how can I contribute to the society in whatever ways I can? It doesn't have to be financial donation. It could be, you know, just a sense of right or wrong. How do I better the society with my abilities and my knowledge?
Yeah. No, hearing you share, Chloe, I think it's very inspiring, especially I think for a younger generation. Because I myself, I actually sit on the youth commission for our government. And a lot of times I feel our youth in Hong Kong, sometimes I think, you know, or encouraging them to dream or encouraging them to explore opportunities, it's a challenge. Because I think somehow our education and culture in Hong Kong, a lot of times they are quite earlier on, if I could use the term, that they're quite boxed in. And whatever they choose to study, they seem to feel they have to be in that field.
Yeah.
And I think your story is so inspiring because it's, as you've said, you know, you've been in so many different areas, business, different psychology, and then you're able to, you know, transition from these disciplines to now find something that is your passion and be successful in that in the last 10 plus years. How would you, I guess, you know, a bit of selfish desire as a YDC member, how would you encourage, I guess, youngsters of Hong Kong today with your story of how you transitioned between disciplines and subjects to pursue your life passion now? Like, what are some, you know, pearls of wisdom that you could inspire for the Hong Kong youth?
That's a really big question. You know, and I think interestingly, I've been thinking a lot about it because I just delivered a graduation address and I'm delivering another one later on. So this month, I'm thinking a lot about high school graduates, so people who are 18 to 22, because we're quite involved with the universities in Hong Kong regarding scholarships and mentoring programs. So I get to interact with the youth sometimes. I have noticed that we really need to create more space for children, for the youth to have courage to try and to say that, oh, it's okay if it doesn't work, or it's okay if you want to study this or learn this after school. It might not be practical, or you might not be successful at it, but there must be value in it. You will learn something out of it. I would encourage you to try it. Let's see what happens. I think we need a bit more of that mentality overall. I'm sure there are parents and teachers who are like that. But what I'm thinking is that in general, I think we need to support that culture more. With that, I think after a longer period of time, we might see more creativity coming out of our next generations. You know, we'll see people willing to take on a more diverse area of fields. That's something that we have always talked about in Hong Kong. We need to diversify our talent pool more and our industries more. I think when you talk about youth work, we have all these visions and missions for Hong Kong and these goals we want to achieve, but how do we develop the talents we need for it? It's definitely something we are constantly thinking about in the art and culture field. Where will our talents come from?
Just going back to arts and culture, how do you see the space currently? Would there be some, I don't know, figures we could kind of get an understanding of how Hong Kong mainland and other regions around the world, or even in Asia, how do we all kind of compare, and how do you see the space?
So, you know, we always like to have this saying about Hong Kong being a place that doesn't have a lot of culture or doesn't have a lot of cultural activities. It's such a misconception that no matter how much is happening now, people still sometimes have that concept. But if we look at the statistics, if we really look at, first of all, government spending per capita on art and culture, we are definitely at the same level with the US and the UK. So our government focuses quite a lot on art and culture. Second, if we just look at the commercial side of it, so Hong Kong has been one of the top art trading place for many years. So people appreciate Hong Kong infrastructure as a art trading hub. But most importantly, I think if we look at the number of galleries and museums we have in Hong Kong and art and cultural activities we have, I think it was that we had about at least 350 galleries. We had 8,000 plus arts and cultural events in a year. That is a lot for such a small city. So actually a lot of things are going on. Perhaps we still continue to have this misconception of Hong Kong being a place that doesn't focus on culture. It's because it is not part of everyone's daily life. Expanding art and culture into the entire audience of Hong Kong, regardless of education level, regardless of socio-economical background, is really important. And making it accessible is very, very important. Most of our museums are free. If they're not free, they are not expensive compared to museums in other cities. And there are a lot of patrons who are supporting public free access to museums and art and cultural activities. So we focus a lot on that. For a typical resident of Hong Kong, because we're so busy with making a living, Hong Kong is very expensive to live in. So sometimes we feel that it's out of reach. We feel that I don't have the luxury of the time to go appreciate art and culture. It's about opportunity cost. So how do we, I think something that we really need to think about and to work on is starting in school, we need to engage children and their families to get more involved in art and cultural activities, to cultivate general basic art appreciation. It doesn't have to be, oh, so that I could understand Picasso, so that I can understand Mozart, or I can properly critique a Zhang Daqian. It's not to that level about art appreciation. It's basically just saying, oh, even though I live in a very small space at home, I can still play some music and enjoy it. I can still decorate it to the best of my ability and have beauty in my everyday life. So the way we see it, my family, the foundation, our museum, the way we see it is that if we bring art and culture into someone's life, we're hoping that it will permeate into every aspect of your life so that you see beauty in the world that you're in, you see beauty in your culture, you're proud of what your culture has, ceramics, furniture, visual art, music, and through that you find joy in everyday life and we find containment. So for us, it's really about bettering the society in terms of helping people find beauty and joy in life. So that's why we talk about art appreciation so much. So that's why we feel that it's so important to use art and culture to tell the stories.
In recent years, we've noticed in our region, for example, in Thailand, Korea, the creative and art and culture space seems to be expanding. Very obvious in pop culture, as you had mentioned, but also in the art space. You know, in Hong Kong, in our recent, few art fairs, there seems to be quite an increase of overseas exhibitors in Hong Kong that came to the Hong Kong Fair. They seem to be increasing. Would you say that? And what are the keys to that success?
I wish I knew the key to their success. I think for Korea, it's very interesting because our Hong Kong Foundation has recently done a study on art tag. They also really look at how the Korean governments put resources into facilitating culture as an industry. So intellectual property, technology, funding schemes and investment schemes that would help the creative industries help with GDP. I think that is a very important component of it. So I hope that when we look at art and culture, maybe we could also, put more economics around it. I think we're doing that right now. We do have a habit of thinking that culture is free and culture does not bring in economic value. We do have a history of thinking that way. I think that's changing. Government funding is a double-edged sword. So I have to say that carefully because I'm on a lot of committees that make grants, but I am also running a nonprofit organization. So what I'm seeing is that sometimes we could have the mentality of relying on supports because it's such a difficult field to be in, to make a living, especially in a city like Hong Kong. When the general audience or the general public is very used to concerts being free or lower prices, or when art shows are free, then it becomes hard for the entire ecosystem for artists to make a living, for all the other functions, people in that field to make a living. So I think overall, it's important for us to strike a balance between making art and culture accessible and also making sure that people in the art and culture field are making a living. We don't want to put the two in conflict with each other. So if everything is free, then how do artists and producers and everyone make a living, right? If everything is subsidized and sponsored. But then if things become very expensive, how can they be accessible? So I think that's a constant struggle. I don't have the answer to how Korea is doing it, but I know that in terms of exporting their pop culture, of course, everyone knows it has been greatly successful. I think it has to do with content creation. It also has to do with the entire ecosystem and how they come together to support that industry.
I think, just now you mentioned a lot of times we need to appreciate our roots, our past, to be able to understand the value of what we're seeing today. I mean, this is perhaps a little silly observation from me, but when we go to places like Japan, Korea, or Thailand, even India, there are always these museums or palaces that we visit. There seems to be an attraction or affinity of people or tourists going there, but putting on those traditional outfits or dressing up or just, being in that traditional culture area. I feel we have the space in Hong Kong, we have those architecture, but we don't have that similar ambience or attraction for tourists. And I wonder, is it that tourists are not interested to do that in Hong Kong, but yet that seems to be something that tourists are doing in other places? Or are we not able to foster that ecosystem in Hong Kong? Because I think, the wider topic you touched on just now is translation research and applied research. How do we make something that essentially we want to make it sustainable, you know. If you look at the wider picture in Hong Kong right now, we talk a lot about biotech, innovation, but at the end of the day is how does that actually translate to, you know, contributing to the GDP of Hong Kong, contributing to the livelihoods of Hong Kong people. And I think this theme is something on a broader picture Hong Kong needs to work harder on a number of spaces. It seems that, you know, our current government is very proactive in this space right now. What are some things we could do in the next few years to really have applied research or commercial translation to be fostered more in Hong Kong?
Kevin, I think you're spot on with that observation, because every time I have visitors to Hong Kong, I would take them to Hong Kong Museum of History. And it's always surprising to them about the history of Hong Kong and how we have so many different groups of people in Hong Kong and different cultures. And I would also bring them to Nanning Garden in Diamond Hill, because it is such an oasis in our city. It has great pine trees, it has very traditional Chinese garden design. And by doing that, I have really shocked some of these visitors who have been to Hong Kong many times. They would often tell me, oh, every time I come to Hong Kong, I usually go shopping. You have great shopping, and then we will go to great restaurants, and then sometimes we even go out at night, and then there's a great nightlife. But I never knew we have so many cultural activities that we have been missing out on. So what that tells me is that on one hand, perhaps most of our visitors are coming for shopping and eating and having fun. On the other hand, maybe there's a lot more work we all need to do in having pride in what we can offer in the city, the cultural activities we have, and promoting that at an institutional level, at a city tourism level, but also personally. Whenever we have someone coming into Hong Kong, we think of one or two things that are culture that we take them to. I wish that we had more ongoing performances that we could take our visitors to. So I talk a little bit about museum and garden, and you know, we always have art shows, galleries, and museums we can go to. But performances, sometimes if you have an out-of-town guest, I wish we had perhaps a show. Just like when you go to New York, you go to Broadway, there are ongoing shows, and in London, you also have theaters that you can take visitors to. I also hope we have more shows like that that we can use to tell the story of Chinese cultures to visitors of Hong Kong. I think on the other hand, the great thing is that I'm seeing that mentality change now. First of all, with the opening of Hong Kong Palace Museum and the opening of M+, I have definitely seen these two places becoming the top must-visit place for visitors. They would, even though they don't usually go to museums, they would tell me, oh, I heard that these two places have opened. I really want to go see it. So that's great news. When you talk about when we go to Kyoto, we rent a kimono and experience that culture, and we do that in Korea and often other culture. Recently, I have seen more, not just visitors, but residents wearing cheongsam and scrolling the streets of Hong Kong, older streets of Hong Kong where you can see historic buildings. Of course, part of it is taking photos and creating memories, but I think there's an awakening of perhaps Hong Kong could be a cultural tourist attraction. I think all of us could promote it a little bit more when we have friends coming in, when we have business visitors coming in, we could show them one or two cultural activities.
Chloe, I recently had an opportunity to meet a few youth, and one of them shared that he has a heart for art and culture. But he mentioned how difficult it was to, as a high school student, to enter the space and to have the encouragement just to, you know, pursue and really develop into the space. And I guess, you know, it really made me reflect, and I really want to ask you is it really that in Hong Kong, people who want to enter the space, is it more challenging compared to other places, or is it just in general, as somebody who wants to start in arts and culture, in general, everybody is challenging? That's the first question. I guess the second question is is the challenge also related to it being Chinese culture? Like, how do we make Chinese culture more accessible, more more enticing to others around us?
I think your first question is very dear to my heart as well, because I have interacted with and talked to a lot of students as well who are pursuing fields in art and culture or studying for it. And it does break my heart sometimes that they feel quite discouraged. I think they do hear a lot of voices around them telling them that, oh, that's not going to help you make a living. Oh, why would you go into that field? If you are bright and study hard, you should be a professional. You should pursue a career that will help you buy a property. You know, in Hong Kong, it's very much about that. So I think what we all need to do as a society is not just when working with students, right? I think we really need to make sure we are respecting and we're giving proper credits to people who choose to pursue areas in arts and culture and have contributed to society. For example, a great teacher of ours, Professor Yao Zhongyi, he is a great scholar and he is also a great artist, a great musician. But for a very long time, he was only known in academia and he wasn't known outside of it. Fortunately, later on, more recognition was given to his overall achievement and overall just as a great resident of Hong Kong, someone who, because of our soil in Hong Kong, the universities here, the people here, he was able to pursue his scholarly achievement by respecting him and making him a cultural icon in so many sense. And I think that's similar to, I think we have Bruce Lee, we have Jin Yong. I think these great cultural icons do give people a sense of hope that pursuing art and culture and scholarly humanities efforts also bring success. It might not be financial success. I talk about three great persons, but we also have a lot of other contributors in art and culture who are very successful, but maybe not everyone knows about them. But in Hong Kong, we do tend to know about, you know, the tycoons who are very wealthy. So I think the conversation needs to change a little bit so that throughout the society, we value people who are contributing differently. So going back to your question about the student, how do we cultivate a sense of pride in his parents, in his teachers, when the student wants to pursue a field in art and culture? Do we say, nah, that's going to be difficult, don't do it? Or do we say, good for you, it's not going to be easy, it's challenging, but I will support you and I hope you will succeed. So I think it's about that. The second part, your second question regarding making Chinese culture more enticing, that is the question that keeps me up at night. I feel like it would be my lifelong mission, I believe. Personally, I don't have an answer. I can only share perhaps my personal story a little bit. So when I was growing up, I read a lot because I was very bored. And the only entertainment I could really access was books that my father had. So at a young age, I started reading a lot of his books that were about Chinese philosophies. I did not understand them when I was younger, but I think through reading and just hearing about some of these philosophies and concepts and values, so, you know, respecting teachers, respecting the elder, having a sense of pride in your country, in your culture, a lot of these philosophies, I think, have put a seed in me. So as I was growing up, and especially when I went abroad to study, the contrast of how other culture are so proud of who they are. I was in the US for a long time, so it's a place where people would take their national pride to daily conversation. And I couldn't help but ask myself, wait, why are we not doing that? I don't see, growing up, I did not see that in Hong Kong. So I realized that you should be very verbal about being proud of your culture and proud of your national identity. I think through contrasting, through being in other places, you then realize who you truly are. So I think the important lessons I have learned is that, first of all, we do need to make sure some of the classics are shared. Maybe it doesn't have to be taught always, but share with children and the youth. Some of our traditional values, we need to be a bit more repetitive about that. You know, you should let the elderly walk first. You should, a lot of these traditional values, we need to carry them on a daily basis. On the other hand, I think it's so important for us to go outside, go external, in order to realize how valuable our own culture and identity is. Only through that, we would realize that there's so much value in what we have. And it's not a comparison. I'm not saying, oh, my culture is better, your culture is better. It's about everyone should be proud of their culture. And we should understand and take time to learn about our culture so that we can be proud of it and talk about it.
Thank you so much, Chloe, for your time today, and just so admirable to hear about all that you're doing in the art and development space and culture space, and such an exciting space. Also hearing about what progress we've made in Hong Kong, and also hearing about other places in the region. Thank you for being such a strong advocate for us in Hong Kong in this space.
And
we look forward to welcoming you back on the show again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Kevin.
Chloe. Thank
It's my
you.
pleasure.